We're excited today to have two folks from the U.S. DOT, Ann Shikany and Tina Hodges. Ann is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation, working on implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law with a focus on climate solutions. She initially joined the U.S. Department of Transportation as Chief of Staff to Deputy Secretary in October of 2021, where she managed policy and operational portfolio of the Deputy Secretary and advised on critical issues, including mega project delivery, oversight operations of the Joint Office on Electric Vehicles, infrastructure, and other issues. Previously at NRDC, she developed low carbon transportation infrastructure policies and campaigns for the federal and local levels. She also held positions at Portland, Oregon Bureau of Transportation, the U.S. Department of Transportation, and the U.S. Department of Energy. Her policy background includes infrastructure finance, transit, active transportation, electric vehicle infrastructure deployment, congestion pricing, and women's economic empowerment. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Kenyon College and a Master of Arts in International Relations from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. She is based in Washington, D.C. with her husband and son. Our other speaker today will be Tina Hodges. She is an environmental protection specialist at the U.S. Department of Transportation on the environmental policy team in the Office of the Secretary. In this position, she provides advice and expertise on climate mitigation and adaptation policy. Ms. Hodges has 16 years of experience at the department conducting policy analysis, program development, research, technical assistance, and outreach to improve the sustainability of transportation networks and enhance the resilience of transportation infrastructure to climate change impacts. Ms. Hodges also served for 2 years at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, commonly known as NOAA, and completed rotation National Park Service and Government Accountability Office. She is a former Presidential Management Fellow. Ms. Hodges holds a Master's of Public Policy and Bachelor's in Politics from the University of Maryland. Prior to her graduate study, she conducted policy advocacy for nonprofit human rights organization. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ann and Tina, and we really appreciate them giving their time this morning to talk to us a little bit about what's going on in DC. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be here and join you and see some familiar faces. Hi, Anna. And I think I'm actually speaking with some of the folks on this call later today to talk about some other exciting climate work. So thank you all for your time and for coming to talk about resilience in transportation. It's a really important topic, and we have some excellent resources under the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Would you say that?
So
might be of interest to you,
if you want to move to slide 2. Today, we're going to be talking about what is our motivation for our work on resilience, some of the major elements of that work, and what we need from you all, adaptation professionals, and how we can best work together. Next slide. So transportation is definitely a poster child for the damage that climate change can have on infrastructure. Rising temperatures, fires, droughts, flooding, and severe weather that are exacerbated by climate change are already putting stress on our transportation infrastructure and system. This is a significant challenge and increasing risk to both the communities that transportation serves and for our broader economy as the freight movement that relies on the network is disrupted. It also negatively impacts all of DOT's goals, safety, mobility, and having solid infrastructure condition. And it also has negative effects on equity. So while DOT's broad climate work focuses on both mitigation and adaptation, today we're going to focus on just our adaptation and mitigation, or sorry, just our adaptation work. Next slide. So I'll start out with our strategic plan, which spans from 2022 to 2026. And climate and sustainability are one of 6 strategic goals. And our broad goal is to put the U.S. on a path to economy-wide net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. And we also need to improve resiliency of at-risk infrastructure. And we have to address the disproportionate negative environmental impacts of transportation on disadvantaged communities. So we're very lucky in that we have unprecedented resources to address climate issues from the bipartisan infrastructure law. This is truly a once-in-a-generation investment, and it's going to do a lot outside of climate, but we've got $550 billion in new investments, and that includes the largest investment in public transit, the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak. We've got bridge investments, the largest infrastructure investment since the construction of the interstate system, and investments in the Joint Office in clean energy and EV infrastructure. So we also have a bunch of new programs that are climate specific, including the first ever climate title and specific grant programs related to climate. Some of those are the Protect Resilience program. We both have a new formula program and a new discretionary program. We've got the carbon reduction program, what we call CFI, charging and fueling infrastructure, and NEVI, the National Electric Vehicle Formula program. Those are both run by the Joint Office. And we have a definition of resilience in the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is incredibly important. Billions of dollars of funding to both states and cities to improve the resilience of our transportation system. So some of that, if you look at the Protect program in particular, we've got funding for evacuation routes, coastal resilience, and some of the other pieces that I would call out include natural infrastructure. So we also have a definition of natural infrastructure included in the bipartisan infrastructure law that is going to be really important as we utilize funding to leverage our existing natural environment to help us achieve greater resilience. And you can go ahead, Tina, to the next slide. So one piece of policy that we have is in August 2021, we published the Climate Action Plan on Adaptation and Resilience. And it's a really important document. It includes a policy statement from the Secretary. Its guiding principles are using the best available science, prioritizing the most vulnerable, preserving ecosystems, building community relationships, and engaging globally. And in that climate action plan, you can go to the next slide. We have 5 priority strategies related to climate adaptation and resilience. And those include incorporating resilience into DOT grant and loan programs, enhancing resilience through project planning and development, ensuring resilience of our internal DOT facilities and operational assets, which we have a lot. I don't know if folks know, but we run the national airspace system. So there are air traffic control towers all over the country, ensuring that we have climate-ready services and supplies, and improving climate education and research on resilience. So we also put out a progress report in fall 2022. But another piece of work that we're doing is incorporating resilience into the NEPA process. So doing quite a bit of work on permitting. I feel like the congressional thrust is usually get it done more quickly. We are definitely hearing that, but we also want to make the process better by improving the inputs into the NEPA process and ensuring that the NEPA process develops projects that are stronger, have a better ability to withstand the effects of climate change, and really reflect the cumulative impacts of their creation on the broader system. So we're definitely going to make sure that resilience is considered when we look at asset management, and we're currently drafting guidance on incorporating climate change analysis into NEPA. You can go to the next slide. Another piece that we're going to be looking really closely at is equity issues. And under the Biden administration, we have the Justice 40 initiative to make sure that 40% of the benefits of the bipartisan infrastructure law and other associated pieces of legislation and funding are flowing to disadvantaged communities. There are a set of covered programs at DOT. We have 39 across 5 different modes, which is a total of $204 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. I'm not sure, but I think that there are probably additional programs that were covered under IRA. But we've been working really hard to make sure that we're getting those resources out. And so this slide shows a screenshot of a tool that we have created. It's called the Equitable Transportation Community Explorer tool. It's an interactive web application that uses 2020 census tracts and data to explore disadvantaged communities' experience. And it looks at transportation insecurity, climate and disaster risk burden, environmental burden, health vulnerability, and social vulnerability. And we're happy to share that if folks don't know where it is. But coming soon, previewing that we will be putting out through the White House a national resilience framework later this year. I'm going to say just later this year. I'm not going to say exactly when, but we are working very closely with our partners at the White House and across the government to put that out. Really looking forward to working with you all on the input to that framework and carrying out the work from it going forward. And with that, I will hand it over to my esteemed colleague, Tina, to talk about some of the details for our funding programs.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Ann. So I'll pick up where Ann left off, talking about our climate change adaptation activities at the U.S. Department of Transportation, starting with one of the areas that people tend to be most interested in, which is the funding. So most DOT funding goes out through formula programs, which distribute the funding directly to state and local transportation agencies based on formulas typically established in the legislation. These formula programs have very broad eligibilities, and there's a lot of discretion that state and local governments have on how to spend the funding. They can be used to fund a wide variety of transportation projects. And because of these broad eligibilities, that also includes projects that improve resilience and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to our formula programs, we also have our discretionary grant programs. So these funds are distributed based on competitive grant applications. Because climate resilience is so important to meeting our strategic goals, DOT has incorporated climate resilience considerations in the funding criteria that we use for selecting projects under our discretionary grant programs. So we have standard climate resilience language in our notices of funding opportunity, resilience criteria included in our big multimodal grant programs such as RAISE, Infra, and MEGA, as well as our mode-specific programs such as the Port Infrastructure and Development Program. I'll also mention that we have under the DOT Navigator, and the DOT Navigator is a website that's the one-stop shopping for grantees who are looking to apply for DOT funding. So on the DOT Navigator website, we have a checklist for grantees applying for funding to help them figure out how to make a strong case on climate change, how best to incorporate climate change considerations in their projects, and then explain that in their applications. So the PROTECT program, of course, is going to be of utmost interest to this audience. Ann mentioned it a little bit already, but this is our program that's focused specifically on resilience. So the program purpose is to plan for and strengthen surface transportation to be more resilient to natural hazards, climate change, sea level rise, flooding, extreme weather events, etc. This program is administered by the Federal Highway Administration. However, its eligibilities are multimodal. So it can be used to improve resilience of not only highways, but also public transportation, ports, and intercity rail. The PROTECT program is actually technically two programs. The PROTECT Formula program, which is funded with $7.3 billion over the 5-year period of the bipartisan infrastructure law. This funding is distributed directly to the state DOTs. And then there's the PROTECT Discretionary program, which is funded with $1.4 billion over the 5 years of the law. And these are competitive grants to state DOTs, MPOs, local governments, tribes, and territories. We have a notice of funding opportunity out right now. Applications are due August 18th. Another aspect of the PROTECT program that I'll mention is that it provides an incentive for states and metropolitan organizations to develop resilience improvement plans. If they develop these plans, they get an increase in their federal share under the program. And to be eligible, these plans need to analyze the vulnerability of the transportation system to climate change impacts and also provide a prioritized list of projects to improve resilience. The PROTECT program website link is here, and for some reason when you use Google, it takes you to different places that are not the program website. So please use this link here, which is the correct one. NatureBased Solutions. As you know, NatureBased Solutions use natural materials and processes to reduce flood risks, erosion, wave damage, heat impacts, and other risks. DOT is encouraging the use of nature-based solutions because they come with so many co-benefits, benefits to habitat, pollutant filtering, recreation. We've included in the criteria for the PROTECT program incentives on using nature-based solutions. And we also mentioned nature-based solutions in the standard language for the criteria for the other DOT discretionary grant programs. I'll also highlight a resource that I worked on when I worked for Federal Highway Administration, which is an implementation guide for transportation agencies on using nature-based solutions. So we have a lot of technical assistance available. Over the past 20 years, the Department of Transportation has been working on this issue. So I'll just highlight a couple of these. I generally recommend that people start with the vulnerability assessment and adaptation framework, since that steps transportation agencies through a process of analyzing vulnerabilities and developing adaptation strategies, and it's specific to transportation agencies with examples from across the country. We've also funded pilot projects working with state and local communities across the country. I'll also highlight a recent resource, which is a new guidebook on addressing resilience in the asset management process. For those engineers in the audience, we have our hydraulic engineering circulars, which have been updated with climate change considerations. We've got reports and tools that are applicable to all modes of transportation, and then we've got ones that are specific to certain elements, such as a report on pavement resilience and a report that I worked on a number of years ago on public transportation. I'll also mention our Thriving Communities program, where we are providing, we're funding technical assistance providers to work directly with disadvantaged communities to help them develop projects, apply for DOT funding, and develop projects that provide a number of benefits, including climate resilience. The National Highway Institute has several training courses available on climate resilience. These came out in the past year or so. The first 4 of these are available online and they're free. The last one on the list here is in-person 2-day training. That one does have a fee associated with it. These are very high quality trainings and I recommend them to you and also ask that you spread the word. I'll also mention a little bit about our current research activities. We're doing a work with the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. We've got a 15-member industry coalition working on a framework for quantitative resilience assessment. There's also work developing a manual on risk and resilience and a resilience and disaster recovery tool. Here's where you'll find most of our resources. This top one here is our main DOT climate change website. And then from there, you'll also see these links. The DOT Climate Change Center is the focal point for policy and action on climate change across the department. So from this site, you'll see links to the different operating administration climate change pages, as well as information on our climate change policies, funding programs that relate to climate change, and technical assistance and resources on climate change. So we were thinking about what we could do to work together, what would be really helpful from adaptation professionals such as yourselves. So the first thing that we thought of is translating adaptation science for transportation professionals. I think this is a lot of what adaptation professionals do, is translate the science into practical, usable information for people who need to make decisions. And that need is also very strong in the transportation sector, especially given the large infusion of funding we have from the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's very important that that infrastructure be built in a way that it will withstand the conditions of the future. Also, we hope that you'll make use of our tools and resources and share them with others who may be interested in them. In addition, since we have a grant program focused on resilience and resilience eligibilities in our broader grant programs, we'd ask that in your work with state and local governments, you can help them incorporate resilience into their projects. There's also a role for linking transportation partners with others who are working more broadly on climate adaptation and vice versa. Also developing interdisciplinary teams. As you know, this field requires a whole range of professionals, everyone from planners to engineers and ecologists to public engagement specialists, et cetera. We also want to know what you're hearing from our stakeholders. You very much have your ear to the ground and are hearing things that please do pass along to us your insights and observations. And please share with us your ideas for better integrating resilience into transportation planning and project development, and let us know what we can be doing at DOT to further advance the goal of having a resilient transportation system. So thank you. So with that, I will turn it back over to the event organizers, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Tina and Ann. If you'd like, you can put questions in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll you can unmute and you can ask your question. So the first question's already been asked. We will share the slides, and this is also being recorded and can be shared with the folks that are members of the policy planning group. Angie.
Oh, hi. That was really great. I learned about some programs I wasn't aware of, so great. Thank you. I work out here in California and can share that with a lot of communities. I have a sort of a broader question I've been asking to a lot of agencies lately. It's just about funding deployment and just a lot of what we're seeing. If it's not a formula grant, it's a competitive grant. And just, we're doing a lot of agencies are doing a lot of work with TA and other things to try to make it easier to access those programs, which is super great. And I'm also just wondering if you're considering any other mechanisms. So I'm out there kind of looking at different systems for deployment of funding outside of, having a lot of communities take up a lot of their time in competitive grant making. And just wondered if you've seen other models to deploy funding in a way that's fair and still gives you the outcomes and accountability that you need.
So I'll take a crack at answering that. I think part of the reason that we have split, or that we were lucky enough to have some of these funds split between discretionary and formula does give us more flexibility in how that money gets out. I think, we are going to be going back to the states to kind of figure out how they are spending their Protect formula dollars to understand where is the money going to. On the kind of discretionary grant rigmarole, I 100% hear you. We know that it's difficult. I can share that we have seen a very large uptick in first-time federal grantee applications, which is great. Hopefully that's because of the technical assistance we've been providing. We're going to continue to provide additional technical assistance on some of the federal requirements, including for NEPA, so that more first-time and low-capacity grantees can get over that particular hurdle. We're also trying to streamline our grant agreement process so that we can reduce the average period of time from grant award to obligation. Some of that is by pre-populating grant agreements. Some of that is streamlining just the process and the kind of template for the grant agreement. But beyond that, I'm not aware of any other kind of opportunities of just kind of like sending money to particular places. We do have to comply with competitive processes because of federal requirements. But Tina, anything I'm missing?
I think that's a very good sum up. We're also constantly trying to streamline our notices of funding opportunity and make them more clear and concise,
while putting stuff in that requires resiliency when possible. It's a push and pull of trying not to make it a Christmas tree of requirements, while also still getting the stuff that we want.
I'm going to go to the next question. Apologize in advance, Pallavi.
Thank you so much. That was a really insightful presentation, so I appreciate. My questions are really on two specific aspects. One is sort of the granularity, if you will, of data. So, I work in the Massachusetts area, and we have a pretty good state leadership team that is shepherding resources to municipal bodies for climate resilience, and also putting out tools that help with understanding or making uniform flood inundation and modeling. So one question I had was around, I'm just wondering if there is a place where, the data that is being mapped at the federal level across the country sort of stops and the state level kind of takes priority. That's one question. And the second one is really about, prioritizing equity and vulnerable populations that you mentioned, which is awesome. But we are also seeing, depending on how the grants are structured, that a lot of these EJ communities, or I should say, the community organizations within the communities don't have the capacity to sort of, play a huge role in writing the grant or even partnering with municipalities. So I'm wondering if there's a way for these communities to have a part of the resources being offered without making it impossible for them to really have that kind of capacity to participate. Hopefully that made sense.
I'll defer to you, Tina, on the data question. I don't know if you want to tackle that one first.
Sure. So on the data question, we do have downscaled temperature and precipitation data on a fairly granular basis, down to, a couple, kilometer scale. And DOT has a partnership with NOAA to make sure that we're coordinating and doing the best we can to get the climate science data that transportation practitioners need. The NOAA camera tool, which is climate mapping resilience, something or other, presents that data in a pretty user-friendly format. So I do recommend that tool. There's also the FHWA CMIP tool, which takes downscale data. That is a little bit more complicated to use, but it converts it into several of the parameters that transportation planners and engineers typically use. And then in terms of the equity impacts, I'd recommend again the Thriving Communities program as being devoted to helping lower capacity communities, because that's providing assistance with grant writing and project development. It also, in the notice of funding opportunity for the Thriving Communities program for providing funding to the technical assistance providers, it included that the technical assistance providers should devote in their budget funding, direct funding to community organizations so that they have the capacity to better engage. And Ann, do you want to add?
I would say one thing that we've been looking at is partnership with MPOs to improve their public engagement on long-term planning. So when they create the STIP and the tips, if it's such a bureaucratic process, and I don't think that people even understand that process exists. So we are thinking through opportunities to improve engagement on those long-term planning processes and making sure that folks can have a say, because you shouldn't have to necessarily do an entire federal grant application to have kind of your community's input into how your community is going to look in the future. So I think that improving those public processes is important. And then also back on the NEPA and permitting side, we're trying to improve the accessibility of those processes. So once a project is moving forward and going through NEPA, it'll be much easier for community members to maybe just pull up their phone, look at the project and make a comment during the public comment period, rather than the current process where it's like you go to a project website, you have to go through like 18 different PDFs and like Control F through each one to try and find a certain thing. We're hoping to improve that process so it's much more interactive and accessible.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks. I have a question in the chat. Alex says, thank you for the presentation. With the competitive grants, are you looking for any indications of coalitions on the ground that include community groups? And how do you want to see states working with communities?
So I guess I don't know, Tina, do you know more about the discretionary grant requirements and if partnering with community gives you a leg up? I assume it does, but.
Yeah, it's under the equity criterion. It's asking about what type of engagement are you having with community groups and stakeholders. And so that's one of the areas that they're evaluated on.
Great.
And like I mentioned, those kind of long-term, the state transportation improvement plans, seeing them really solicit meaningful community impact or input into those is something we'd like to see. I don't know. We have a lot of work with state DOTs, so having them include communities more so is definitely a high priority for us. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any other additional specifics.
Thank you.
We do have a recent publication on meaningful engagement with communities on transportation planning. Take a look at that one.
One thing I'll note for our Joint Office of Energy and Transportation for the electric vehicle charging infrastructure work, they are just getting in their second round plans for their formula dollars. And in this second round, we required an addendum on community engagement. So hopefully those will come back very robust. And we're hoping to kind of find a few to lift up as best practices.
I'm going to move to Joel, and then I'll ask another question from the chat from Nancy.
Difficulty getting myself unmuted. Hi, I'm Joel Smith from Boulder, Colorado. And yeah, I have to say, I remember going to a meeting in, I think, 2002, organized by a DOT Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy, just to start getting their arms, wrap the arms around the issue. So this is very impressive to see what you guys are doing. I have a question about, you say you look for resilience in proposals. And how do you judge that? What's resilient? So, and I'm wondering, first, there's sort of a more of a minimum standard or formula approach, like what's in the executive order on flooding, raise freeboard by 2 to 3 feet, depending on what's at risk, or is it more approach of let 1,000 flowers bloom, see what's out there, see what's most promising? I'm just curious, how do you, and especially given that, many cases we know the direction of change, we know it's going to get hotter and more intense rain, it's hard to know the exact magnitude. So also, how do you judge what's appropriate given the uncertainties?
Did I start with this one, Ann?
Go ahead, Tina.
So the criteria specifically calls out evidence-based methods using federally available data sets and tools, which we have on our Climate Change Center Technical Assistance website. So we look at, whether they're using the best available science, and whether what they're proposing would respond to those future impacts that are likely to occur.
Okay. The next question is from Nancy, pretty straightforward. Do you have documents and programs for transportation planners that describe nature-based solutions?
Yes.
Cool.
So in the slides, which will be distributed, there's a link to the Nature-Based Solutions for Coastal Highway Resilience Implementation Guide. And I'd encourage you to look at that. And also there is a guide on riverine nature-based solutions that's under development currently.
Next question from the chat. Do you have a sense of timeline process for designating the national and 10 regional centers of excellence for resilience and adaptation as directed by the IIJA?
So that didn't come with funding.
So I'm assuming, Tina, that's probably on the back end of our list, but I don't, for prioritization, but I don't know. Yeah, my understanding is that since there wasn't funding attached, it wasn't something that we were able to do. It doesn't mean that we don't think it's not important. Just our first priority is making sure we don't lose any of the money that was given to us, because we have to get it all out the door first. But we can follow up and see if there's any indication that we can share with you on that.
This is okay. We still have some more questions. We've got about 3 more minutes. So can you speak to the interagency coordination a bit? How is DOT coordinating with FEMA HUD on resilience and adaptation?
Sure. So I would say for the climate resiliency framework that'll be coming out later this year, the White House has been convening an interagency work group to build out that framework. And then we have additional coordination on kind of specific areas. So like we have one on ports where we're going to bring together all the folks who have money for ports. So like EPA, DOT, I think Coast Guard, and figure out how can we coordinate to make sure that the funding aligns with all of our priorities. We also have institutions like the CMTS, which is the maritime coordinating body that brings together a lot of interagency folks. And they've done, they just put out some interesting pieces on port resilience there as well. But I don't, Tina, are there other ongoing activities we should highlight?
There are a lot of interagency working groups, and there's a lot of connections both at the senior and political levels and at the staff levels. So there's pretty frequent communication back and forth.
I think our last count of IPCs might have been like close to 200. That's on all different areas of work, not just resilience, obviously, but there's a lot of interagency coordination.
And then looks like our last question is a good one. How do you define best available science?
Well, that's a fun one, right? And the way we define it is based on our research and technical assistance products generally. So we've tried very hard with the reports and the tools that we've put out to highlight methodologies and data sets that are very strong, relying on other federal agencies like NOAA and USGS. So basically, yeah, if you read all those reports and do those things, that would be best available science.
Well, thank you, Ann and Tina, so much for speaking and taking some time this afternoon to come and speak with us. And we look forward to future engagement with you. And with that,
so much.
I'd like to turn it back over to Anna.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, and echoing the thanks to Anna and Tina, really appreciate the presentation and conversation. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes left in the meeting, and our plan will be to do some round robin policy updates and then turn it over in case Eliza and Rachel have any ASAP updates, and then we'll wrap up from there. So if anyone has policy updates you want to share, feel free to raise your hand or drop them in the chat, and people can have about 1 or 2 minutes to share their updates if you have them. A couple quick ones that I'll share from legislative branch in DC. Congress is in recess right now, but a couple important things to note from before they left is that a lot of the annual appropriations bills started to move. So the Senate Appropriations Committee passed all 12 of the subcommittee bills out of committee. So there's some news stories on their website about that. And then the House has passed most of the bills out of committee and one of them out of the House. So obviously important for funding for lots of the programs that we care about. And there's a lot of not great news for a lot of the programs we care about, especially in some of the House bills. So worth taking a look at and just kind of knowing about what's going on with the programs, federal programs you might interact with. And then probably it would be interesting to know if people have updates on this, but theoretically House and Senate agriculture committees are hard at work writing their each chamber's version of the Farm Bill. If anyone has updates on how that's going or adaptation integration into the Farm Bill, feel free to jump in and share that. But I think the latest I've seen is that there's anticipation of drafts from House and Senate anytime from like now in August till like in October or later. So that is a big effort underway as well. That's good to keep tabs on. And then most folks have probably seen this on the agency side, but since we pay a lot of attention to NOAA programs, just wanted to share this announcement from earlier this month about $60 million for the Climate Resilience Accelerator program. That would be interesting for us to talk about and track as well. And I know that Josh
Alex!
had a couple updates as well. So Josh, maybe I'll turn it over to you and then we can jump in if anyone else has updates as well.
Sure. Back to my notes here since I was still doing it in real time. So two things I think might be relevant. The main one was I attended the Department of Defense Climate Resilience Workshop for 2023 in St. Louis earlier in July. I don't know if anybody else went to that conference. I guess just raise your hand if you had, and maybe you can add in too. It was what I call an emergent conference. So although the DoD has been doing climate planning and climate impacts and climate resilience assessment for about 10 years now, and ramping up probably around 2014 where they started putting together lots of preliminary climate adaptation type planning documents. And then the National Defense Authorization Act started to get in process with climate resilience. I think this is the first time that the entire DoD ecosystem for climate resilience has gotten together. So it was kind of a revolutionary conference. Although the DoD has been doing, greenhouse gas reductions, energy resilience, and looking at climate change from the perspective of both impacts on installations, greenhouse gas output, energy self-sufficiency, threat multipliers for conflict in different parts of the world, and also humanitarian assistance mission. They really wrote everything. Everything rotates around mission. Like how does climate affect mission? Because that's what they're mainly concerned with. So towards that end, as I said, there's the National Defense Authorization Act sort of create the foundation or the umbrella for the policies that they're doing. There's one being negotiated for 2023 as we speak. So you may have heard about that in the news. But if you go back to the National Defense Authorization Acts, or NDAA 2022, from 2019 through 2022, there's lots of climate in there. And what those have done, they've driven directives, which has then driven planning in each of the branches. So they put out plans, including DoD does have a climate adaptation plan overall, and they've had a climate adaptation progress report, which they put out, I guess, earlier this year, similar to the one that was being talked about for Department of Transportation that we just heard about. Then it trickles all the way down into facilities management. There's something called unified facility criteria, which are basically a whole list of documents that lay out guidelines for all the different activities, from water management to sustainability to facility resilience to adaptation. So I mean, if you want to learn more, I mean, I have folders and folders and files of all these different directives and policies and criteria and everything like that. So at this particular conference, I said it was trying to more or less get everybody on the same page. And one thing that I found really remarkable at the conference is the diversity of participants. So even more than some of the climate conferences I've been to. I mean, of course, there is, the usual cast of characters from federal agencies, DoD, state agencies, local governments, nonprofits, private sector consulting, tribes, but that in terms of how we look at the sort of DEI criteria, it was incredibly diverse. I mean, ages and genders and race and it's just I hate to say, but compared to some of the climate conferences I've been to, this was an extremely diverse conference. And also the leadership was very diverse too. I mean, there were 2 tribe members that were keynote speakers during the event. And there was just a lot of enthusiasm among the leadership, the DoD sort of agency leadership for climate resilience. They really see the connection between mission and climate resilience, and also engaging the community. They have 2 programs that were really well represented there. The REPI community was called the Readiness and Environmental Protection and Integration Program. Some of you may have heard of it. NIFWIF, or National Fish and Wildlife Federation, is involved in implementation of that program in cooperation with DoD. Jessica Granis, who was on the ASAP board, is involved with implementing the climate resilient part of that. So that was well represented. It's mostly wildlife, green infrastructure engagement, but then also represented the conference where was the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, which is more understanding how communities support installations and installations support communities, and that you can't have, because snow installation is an island, you have to make the community resilient in order to support the military mission, the installation. So a lot of discussion about that. Among the type of activities they do things called military institution resilience reviews, or MERS, M-I-R-R, and that's one way that you explore the interrelationship between installations and communities in terms of their resilience. So all in all, I think the DoD is, they have their bureaucratic inertia, but when they get a directive, it's very top down, and they really can't, say no, So as a federal agency and their constituents, I think there's a lot of movement going on in that community. So anyway, any questions on that? I'll put some resources that I mentioned in the chat in a second.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Josh. And maybe now I'll turn it over to, well, actually, before I do that, I'll mention Angie put a question in the chat. If anybody has responses, feel free to connect with Angie in the chat or afterwards, because it looks like a good question, but that might take more than just a chat message to answer. But now I'll turn it over to either Rachel or Eliza for any kind of final updates from ASAP and to wrap us up.
Sure.
Go for it, Eliza. I was just trying to get off mute.
I was just going to say that we recently closed the voting portal for our board of directors. So we're really excited to be adding 3 new members to our board of directors. And that'll be coming out later this month. Rachel, did you want to add anything else?
The only other thing I'll say is that we've shared with some of our ASAP member leaders that we're working on special session development for the National Adaptation Forum. And so soon that opportunity is going to be public in terms of how you can get involved in the ways that ASAP is working with NAF to shape the program for 2024. So if that's something of interest to you on policy or any other topic, please look for that, and you can reach out to Eliza if you want to get more information in the meantime.
Awesome. Any other very efficient ASAP updates? Well, I think with that we can wrap up. Thank you everyone for joining us, and many thanks again to Ann and Tina for their presentations, and we'll be sure to circulate materials from the meeting with everybody in the next couple days here. And we will see you back in September. It's important to note we've changed the date of the September meeting. Everyone should see that reflected on their calendar, but to not interfere with the Labor Day weekend, we've moved it a week. So see everyone in September. Thanks so much.